So to get started with the quality management system, we're going to first click on the firm quality management. Now, if you also have our compilation engagement software, you will see the client button. If you don't have that software, that button will not be there. So when you first go into the quality management tool, you will see the navigation pane going down the left side of the screen. So you'll see we can go to overview, nature of the firm, roles and responsibilities, risk assessment components, policies and procedures, monitoring and remediation, a section for documents, and the evaluation. So let's start with the quality management overview. So in this section, this is where you are going to select what your evaluation date is going to be. So the evaluation is going to happen within the first 12 months of your implementation. So if you implement your system December 15th, 2023, you have 12 months to perform your annual evaluation. You can select whatever date you like. So if you would like to do your evaluation, let's say in July when you're not as busy, just select July and whatever the date would be and save that. That date can be changed. If you decide that you don't want to do that later on, that is completely fine. Now, this overview pane is where you're going to come back to get your reports. So there's a risk report, an objectives report, a policy report, and a monitoring activity report. And so as we go through the tool, the information will populate back to this overview screen where you can then go through and create PDFs and distribute the information as required within your firm, or just to have it on hand. The next tab is the nature of the firm. So we will come back to that overview section. So the nature of the firm, we just have a couple really high-level questions here, and this is going to drive the information that's included in the quality objectives, as well as some of the policies and procedures. So you will just from the drop-down select if you're a sole proprietor with no employees, a sole proprietor with employees, or a partnership. For now, we'll select the partnership. There is as well a question about whether or not you belong to a network. Now, if you belong to a network, there are some further considerations and some additional documentation that you're going to want to consider. So if you do, you can select yes, whether it's the network requirements, network services, or both, and then that will drive that required documentation in accordance with the standard. I think most of you are not going to have a network, so we're going to do this demonstration without that network. Now, once I click the update button, everything in the background is going to update. And now, even if I go back into my overview, you are now going to see the objectives written in the form of a partnership. So the next section we're going to have a look at here is roles and responsibilities. So there's two main roles and responsibilities that need to be assigned within your firm. The first one is ultimate responsibility and accountability. So this is going to be your managing partner or management group or whoever is at the top of your firm making those decisions. They're the kind of the buck stops here, individual or individuals. The second one is that with operational responsibility. So the operational responsibility is going to be responsible for making sure that that system of quality management is happening on an ongoing basis and meeting the requirements and any changes that need to be made are getting made. They're also responsible for monitoring and remediation, and they will report to the person who has ultimate responsibility and accountability. Now, in some firms, you might just have one partner, and if you have one partner, they could be assigned both of those roles and responsibilities. That is completely normal. So you'll document who is assigned, and in accordance with CSQM1, you're going to want to describe their experience and authority within the firm. If you're going to combine the roles, you can select yes here, and then just document that in one place. Then you're going to click on Save. The next section is on the risk assessment components, and this is where you're going to be spending a little bit more of your time. So up top here is our 6 components that the standard CSQM1 sets out for us. They've been short formed here just to get us a little bit less screen time. Governance and leadership, ethical requirements, client acceptance and continuance, engagement performance, resources, and information and communication. So if you just hover over those tabs, you will see the full name of those components. So this section is broken up into 3 different sections. The first one is the objectives. So you can click the show objective to see the objective here. Click on the corner little button here to make this a little bit bigger. So these objectives come straight from CSQM1, and they have been slightly tailored just as a result of the nature of the firm selection. So we chose partnership, so this will reflect the fact that there is a partnership, that there are staff. You can tailor these objectives, but you want to make sure that you don't tailor them to the extent that they would change the underlying meaning from the standard. So the only time you really want to tailor this is if there is something that's really not applicable to your firm. And if there are any additional equality objectives, you can edit them down here, and you can also remove that if it's not applicable. So just to take a little less space, we can hide those objectives. Before we do that, we want to make sure we update it. If you've made any changes, you will get a note here that the objective was successfully saved. The next section is a bit of a narrative. Now, the narrative is not a requirement of CSQM1, so you can hide this. You don't have to complete this. But what we found is by thinking about these questions, and it's not the end all be all, but it starts to get you to think about this particular component and what potentially within the nature and circumstances of your firm and the engagements that you perform would negatively impact the achievement of these objectives. So this is just a spot where you could go through and document. Now, if you have a partnership and you're having more people involved in this, then it's probably a good idea to just put a little bit of a narrative in so that you understand where the information is coming from. And again, once you change that, you can click on the update button and you can hide that narrative. Now, based on that information, we now have the objectives. We have your understanding of the nature, circumstances of the firm. Now we need to figure out what is it within your firm that could stop you from achieving those objectives. So in the software, we do have some just default risks. Doesn't mean that they apply to you. We're just trying to make things easier by providing you with a little bit of a starting point. So what you can do here is use the pencil. We're going to go in and update the risk. So we see here, this is the component relating to governance and leadership. Inspection findings are not addressed on a timely basis. That could be the risk. I can put some comments in here, and these comments could be related to the assessment of that risk. And then we are going to select the assessment of that risk. So let's, for example, say that this is, let's say it is a low risk, and maybe under the comments, I want to put something like assessed as low as all inspection findings. Once you have tailored that, you can save the risk. Now, if that risk is not relevant to you, you can select not applicable, and you could put in a comment if you want. Again, the comments are optional. Now, for any risk that was assessed as a quality risk, so it's a low, moderate, high, you now have to determine what you want to do about that risk. And that's where we'll get into these risk responses. And we can do that by clicking the Add a Response button. But we do have these default responses. The standard does have these specified responses, so they have been included within the template. So you can modify the wording of those. And if it does reference that quality risk, you can assign it. Otherwise, you can create your own. So you can just give it a new title. We can say this is the policy. This is the procedure that is going to address that policy. Come down here a little bit. If there's any documents to be used to adhere to that policy, we could say here are the documents. And then we can add that response. So when we add the response, you will now see that that response has been linked to that particular risk. If I don't want that there, I can always select remove that response and it will be removed. As well, you can add more than one response to a risk. So simply go into the plus button and enter a new risk, just as an example. So when I add the risk response, you can now see both of those risk responses linked to that particular quality risk. So you can go through all of these conditions. If you have a new condition, a new quality risk, you can just click on the create and then describe the condition, event, circumstance, action, or inaction. Of course, that's going to adversely affect the achievement of your quality objectives. And this is all going to be the same. It's just not pre-populated for you, but there's always the ability to add additional risks. So this is the same for all of the components. So just to stop and go back to this overview for a moment, you will see now that we have entered some risks. So under the risk report are going to be the risks that have come out. So far we just have that one risk. We have gone through, we have the objectives, and we've selected a quality management policy and procedure in order to address those risks. So you can always come here. As we go through, you will see this update. And the more you complete, the more that this is going to populate. So you will see that there are some of these specified responses included. You can find these policies or procedures if you need to edit them in the policies or procedures section. So for example, there needs to be a policy or procedure around new information, around any changes to the firm's circumstances, in order to ensure that if you need additional quality objectives, or maybe there's a newer modified risk or a newer modified response to those risks, that you have a policy in place. Now, if there was a link to a particular risk, you would see that here. So we added this response in our last section when we talked about the risks. And you can see here that it is tied to this risk on the GL inspection, or the inspection findings in the governance and leadership component. If I want to edit any of those responses, I can come and click on the button and I can add or modify at this point. So I'm going to go through and make sure that every single risk that we've identified has an associated response. And it might require one response, it might require multiple responses. It depends on the risk and it depends on the response that you put into play. Finally, there's a section on monitoring and remediation. So for each of the policies or procedures, you're going to want to develop monitoring procedures in order to ensure that those policies or procedures are being carried out as they were intended to. So to add a monitoring activity, I'm going to select the plus button and then select the classification. So we have a number of monitoring activities that you can pick from, and we can describe here the monitoring activity. So you can go through and you can edit it by clicking on the little pencil if you ever need to go back. As well, there is a tab here for documents. You can upload any document that you need to support your firm quality management system. This could also be where you store your monitoring and remediation documents. And then finally, we will have an evaluation section, but you don't have to worry about evaluation for the first 12 months. So again, coming back to the overview section, what I can now do is I can PDF this report. So if I want to lock in my risks over time, we can download the report. It's going to put all of those risks into a PDF document that I can then share with the rest of your leadership team, share with your staff. So that's just a basic overview of our quality management system.